Hello,
Howdy.
Vaush.
Vaush. Wait, no.
We meet again.
Flutterbox.
Hey,
How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have like sporadic coughing fits all the way throughout this conversation, so I'll try my best to mute
Oh, so
and
you're
will
not all
probably
right.
fail.
What's up?
Oh no, I had like a flu like last week, and it's just no 2 weeks ago, and it's just lingering.
Oh,
So I'm
I'm
just coughing.
sorry.
Feel
Yeah,
fine though.
I got a pretty bad wave of sick a couple of weeks ago that turned out not to be COVID, as obsessively as I tested it after the fact.
Mhm.
And yeah, it really does suck to be reminded occasionally um, that other diseases exist. They didn't, they haven't all been replaced, There's still a grand hierarchy of disease out there.
And I was kind of hoping one would just knock out the others, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they're not on our side, it turns out.
Um, I had to ask you.
Hmm?
Um, I still have these really strong memories of playing video games and watching you on the other screen with a tank top and a fucking neck beard, and now you've become like probably the most dripped human on like all the internet.
No.
What happened? Was that like a conscious decision? Did you ask someone for help? What happened?
It's sincerely, it's just like the autistic special interest shifts with time.
Mm.
Like what you're specifically going for at any given point in time and what you're obsessing over. There's a a Twitter account called Die Workwear that I like a lot, and he talks about like formal men's fashion, which I don't care that much about personally. It's very sort of bourgeois, coded at least, and but I guess I like the principles and actions. So
Wow. I don't often see autistic people with that particular special interest. I feel like autistic people, from my experience, just like care the least about that kind of stuff. That's interesting.
it's definitely been a lot of fun, though it's led to me making some decisions that chat's probably going to roast me for when I get to them. I bought a designer wallet the other day because I've been using the same like extremely worn out wallet for like a decade now. And it's one of those, well, you only replace it once a decade, so you might as well live big kind of kind of
Mhm.
things. But midway through making the decision, it was like, well, hold on, wait, will I be judged for this? But I deserve to be, so that's okay.
I've never heard of a designer wallet.
It's
It's
very
like one of the
shiny.
ones that just like flick it and then it like snaps open into 5 different compartments. Or
Mostly, I think just a matter of build quality. Though I like the design they go for.
okay.
The what's it called? The Paul Ryan, Jack Ryan? I forget the name exactly. I'll have to look it up. It's not Louis Vuitton
Oh,
or Gucci or anything.
Jesus. Well, um, there's a war happening. Shit.
About to be a few of them, it seems.
Yeah, you know what? Like when October 7th started, like maybe a few days in, my dad, who's a bit mental, like just Middle Eastern, like old dude, was telling me, he was like, listen, like I think it's time. I think all the like anti-West countries are going to use this opportunity to, the USA will spread itself thin with its support. Russia will go further into Ukraine, and maybe China will take Taiwan. And like I was like, okay, sure, bro, whatever. And now like Venezuela wants to take over Guyana, and the Argentinians elected a guy who wants to reclaim the Falklands. It's like,
Yeah,
fuck.
I haven't even covered that yet. That one is very funny. Especially because he's been trying to ingratiate himself to Western leaders, with like the whole dollarizing the economy stuff, and then
Hmm.
to immediately go also like, yeah, actually the Falklands are ours. Seems like an excellent way to maintain a stable relationship with the West.
Yeah, although I have heard that it's not uncommon for Argentinian leaders to get elected and just kind of chest puff about the Falklands and then nothing happens. But I don't know. This guy, I don't trust this guy. I don't know. I feel like the Penguins are in trouble. The Brits down there.
Yeah, the world's cutest penguins. I think
Um,
I think he's dialing it back a lot, actually. Apparently he made a lot of antagonistic statements to Lula da Silva when he was running, obviously, because Lula's,
hmm.
socialist aligned at least. And since then, since actually winning, I think it seems he's been a little bit more conciliatory. So I don't know, maybe there's hope for peace yet.
Hmm. Um, as for Israel, Palestine, I guess I caught some of your thoughts from that debate that you had, and maybe just like a few other stream clips here and there. Um, I don't know. Do you want to know where I am first?
Oh
Where
yeah,
we'll
for
start
sure.
and
Well,
see what
I
happens?
I watched a few of your streams. Well, not all of them. I watched portions of them. You were really getting into it, and then I thought, yeah, I should go back and revisit this when I have time. And then I didn't have time. So this is like kind of me getting a sort of distilled info dump, which is absolutely what I'm here for. Yeah, kick it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit. There's like a bit of historical precedent for it. In some ways, not at all, right? I think if you told me before October 7th that something was going to happen, I'd have been like, yeah, probably. We knew that the IDF were stretching themselves thin over the settlements. We knew that people in Gaza actually at one point were complaining about the lack of security down there. Like there were like just far less battalions in that area than they were ever supposed to be. We knew that IDF people weren't turning up for duty and all this kind of stuff, and they were struggling to get new recruits over the Supreme Court reform. So, and even Hezbollah were firing pot shots earlier in the year and saying that like Israel's in trouble, they're weak, the fall is coming and all that shit. But yeah, like so something happening was not surprising, but like to that level and that level of security failure, I think this is. I'm pretty sure, I haven't been able to find anything contradicting this, is that this is the first time ever a Palestinian militant group has ever been able to capture territory and hold on to it for any period of time. They've captured like a building once or twice for a few hours, but like not actually like a piece of Israeli land, Other Arab states have done that for brief periods, but never Palestinians, like not even in the 48 war. Like that's how unprecedented that was.
Yeah, the attack was pretty. I remember hearing about it. It was late at night, and I already done a stream that day, and I'm famously lazy, so I don't want to do two. But then I saw it was like Hamas attack or something, and I saw like, oh, okay, wow, Hamas attack, that's crazy. And then I saw like, no, they actually captured a settlement, and it was like, oh, okay, all right, I guess it's on then. And it's only been fun since.
And just that whole concept that you're on the live UA map and you're seeing like different shades of red on Israeli territory. I was like, what? Yeah, that's insane. But I think I think what's happening right now, I guess, with like the Israeli response is it's really reminiscent of Lebanon in 2006. Like, so that was a war where Hezbollah sent some raids into northern Israel. They killed like maybe 5 people and kidnapped 2 soldiers, and Israel's response to that was to invade the country with the goal of getting rid of Hezbollah forever and to consolidate the Lebanese army and all that shit. So they gave themselves this mammoth of a task, went in, very quickly got slowed down by the tunnel network and by the fact that Hezbollah were actually very sophisticated at intercepting IDF communications and figuring out where they were, surprise attacks, booby traps, and then Israel gets very frustrated and just amps up their bombing campaigns. I think like 1 million Lebanese people were displaced. My grandmother had to flee the country at that point, and then basically
okay?
No, yeah, she's fine. She left again. Actually, she just left not too long ago for the States because again, like things are getting a bit uncertain over there right now. But yeah, no, she's lived through plenty of this. Like 2 invasions by Israel, a civil war, fucking Assyrian occupation. Yeah.
What's the capital of Lebanon? Is it Beirut? Am I thinking of the right place? Yeah, I learned there was a person based from there that I listened to Beirut, right? Yeah, where I learned a lot about it, and it was really, really interesting. There's a lot of economic asymmetry in Lebanon that I wasn't really aware of before listening to that, about like the relative wealth and history of the capital and sort of the political shift towards like relative incompetence and inability to deal with the country's issues, and Hezbollah kind of runs rampant, and yeah, the port explosion and how that never really got cleaned up properly, and there's still broken glass all over the city, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for the longest time, my grandmother's balcony door was just like it had just kind of bumped off its hinges and tilted sideways, so you just had this kind of hole in the wall with a door stuck in it that couldn't move. Yeah, and she was like quite far away from it as well. Yeah,
Jesus.
Yeah, it's probably the hardest country in the Middle East to learn anything about, just because there are so many different groups, and they don't have like a very clear statistical majority. Like it's a third Christian, a third Sunni, a third Shia, and then a bunch of smaller groups as well, about 20 Jews. Yeah, but like
For diversity.
that war in 2006. It was a really good example of just like Israeli failure. They gave themselves this basically impossible task to get rid of Hezbollah, found out that Hezbollah were far more sophisticated and stronger than they ever expected. And it basically resulted with a lot of people died, a lot of people got displaced, and a lot of Hezbollah infrastructure was destroyed. But the end of it was that the leader, Nasrallah, became more popular than ever, and Israel just had to give up and leave. And then after that, you suddenly started seeing like even Christians who didn't really like Hezbollah starting to say nice things about the guy who fought off the Israeli invaders. And then, yeah, it just like it was a failure. It was one of the biggest embarrassments for Israeli military ever.
I was extremely surprised to learn about the competence of Hezbollah. I guess like prior to this conflict, I guess it always sort of mentally filed them under just insurgency group. The degree of organization, like that's something I only learned like 2 months ago. Before that, I just assumed they were on, well, not on like Hamas level or whatever, but you know, like any one of the like groups operating in Syria, just a group that didn't have much going on in terms of logistics.
Nah, I think it was the biggest non-state military in the world. Yeah, they're much scarier than Hamas, and bigger and stronger. But I think the thing with that war was, and why it's kind of worrying about what it means for Israel now, is that Hamas are a lot weaker than Hezbollah. And I think as soon as I saw Israel saying that we're going to get rid of Hamas, I'm like, okay, this is like, that was kind of when I felt like they're not going to stop until they feel like they've done it. And I don't even know if it's guaranteed they can get rid of Hamas. But yeah, that's like the worst thing, is just that I don't even know how much international pressure could possibly convince Israel to stop, like outside of, I don't know.
You know, it seems like
that's the really depressing part.
It seems like Netanyahu's government is like 100% committed. Like they're not even engaging in the political niceties that you would expect them to engage in as a way of sort of delaying condemnation from the United States or trying to rope people in. Like there's not even much of a pretense besides these like really transparent IDF, like, hey, look at us holding these boxes labeled in English, you know, aid or whatever. It seems like they're not even trying, which makes me worry, because if they feel they don't have to try, that's probably because they're, you know, going for a different goal.
Yeah, I saw you talking to Richard Hannay about that yesterday. I think I was maybe going to suggest like a slightly different explanation for like why Israel does what they do, which is still condemnable. I think because the way I think Israeli propaganda works, the way I understand it, is that it's not quite as simple as just like lying about everything. I think they do lie. They lied about like Shireen Abu Akleh's death, and like it turned out they definitely did it. So like that, yeah, they've lied about a lot of things, and you know they lied about the Nakba for like 40 years until they released the archives, and then, but then I think a lot of their propaganda, at least like the main approach they take, is, do you know what hasbara means?
No, I do not.
It's just like the Hebrew word for explanation, more or less. Like the Israeli approach to propaganda is like this whole method that they have of basically saying, actually, yes, we are doing this thing, but here's why it's okay. That's kind of the way that they approach it, which is why it's probably not so unusual for them to say things like, oh, we're not going for surgical, we're just going for damage. We're just going to like fuck shit up until Hamas is gone, right? Like, I think and that seems to be something that they've done very consistently, is that when it comes to like with the way that their military methods go, is like in law, when you're doing military decisions, the idea is that you have to measure civilian deaths and collateral damage versus military advantage, right? So you have to somehow figure out a way that you can measure how many civilian lives are worth this particular military goal, like destroying a tunnel or a weapon stockpile or a communication center or a commander or something like that. And I was reading about just historically different countries and how they do that. It seems to be that more recently, Western powers adopted this thing called a non-combatant casualty cutoff value, like an NCV, which was that for whatever attack they were doing, like a particular strike, they had a maximum number of collateral deaths. So, but depending on the goal, it would change, right? So I think for like bin Laden, an example would be like 30 civilians is worth killing bin Laden in a strike, right? Or a commander, like 15. And then for some objectives, it was like none, as in, we're not going to do this if it means a civilian will die. And this was kind of like an approach that was used by coalition forces in the war against ISIS. And then there were also, it was kind of disclosed that America had like a slightly higher acceptance for civilian deaths than Europe. But the numbers that I read about coming from that war was like 14, 15, 5, 20, 30. Whereas when you see what Israel does with, for example, the Jabalia camp, is that you've got like hundreds of people in this area.
And one guy
hit by a JDAM.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one guy, like a tunnel maybe underneath, maybe a few tunnels, like, but yeah, it's like their level of acceptance for civilian death is like, is so much higher. Like they're just and they don't even seem all that shy about it. Like I think it even I just read this morning that it's more or less, I think it's I don't know if it's confirmed, but I think it's quite clear. It's that they're using this like new AI model to generate targets. To the point that now it's like they have this AI model that is generating like 100 targets a day, and it's assessing and it's somehow guessing the number of civilian deaths, or it's got a way of calculating expected civilian deaths. And when you see the IDF in their statements that they make to the Red Cross or to the UN or whatever, is normally what you would say is that if someone like Hamas is using civilian infrastructure to launch their attacks, which they basically always do, then that compromises its protected status. But just compromises, as in like you can't just say that just because there's like one Hamas guy running around a school, then you just blow up the school.
Yeah,
right?
it's a factor, because you can't make the human shield defense like a literally impervious defense. You know, if any military engagement will lead inevitably to some civilian death. There's no way around that. Like civilians died when Ukraine struck the bridge, the Crimean bridge that Russia uses for rearmament along the southern front in their war. And, you know, like people bitched about that, obviously, but like that can't be avoided to an extent. But there's obviously limits. We don't really do like World War II level strategic bombing campaigns anymore, where the logic is like, well, you know, every civilian, they bolster the war effort by doing economic activity. So actually, they're all military targets.
Yeah. And it's not even that. Like, I don't know if this is what they're doing now, but I know in the Lebanon 2006 war, the idea was that there was this one neighborhood where Hezbollah had their strongest concentration. Like, I think it was like their HQ. And it wasn't just buildings that Hezbollah were actually in, but it was also buildings just around the neighborhood that Hezbollah might move to and use in the future, right? So suddenly this whole neighborhood became a target, right? And I think that's probably the fact that they admit to that almost as well, because I guess they can, because they're not like party to the ICC or anything like that. They're not like signed on to the Rome Statute or anything like that. Is that I think that's probably like the clearest way that I can point to like Israeli behavior, basically. Like, and they've been like this since even since the 40s, or even before that. They've had this like I think one way that it's been described is based on this really old concept called the Iron Wall. Is that Israel believes that, or at least in the past, they believed that when the only way that the Arab states would ever recognize them and allow them to exist as a Jewish state was that they would just be as unreasonably like as aggressive as possible, as a way of kind of like muscling the rest of the Arab states to eventually accept that they exist, right? To make peace with them. So with Egypt, they took over the Sinai Peninsula, and then in the 70s, when Egypt tried to reclaim it, Israel went even further and were marching like almost towards Cairo. And then at that point, Egypt was like, whoa, fuck, we need to definitely like come up with an arrangement. And then, you know, they made peace and Israel gave the Sinai back to Egypt. Then they made peace with Jordan. And then, but the idea was that the way some people viewed this Iron Wall policy was that this might have made sense for Israel getting what they wanted when they were literally surrounded all over by countries that wanted to destroy them. But now they don't have an enemy in Egypt anymore. They don't have an enemy in Jordan. they do have an enemy in Syria, but Assad's kind of busy right now.
Yeah,
They've made peace with like Morocco, and they were close to making peace with Saudi. They made peace with the UAE. So it seems like now they should really be, at least before October 7th, it's maybe easier to say this, that they're supposed to be, ideally, like the idea that beyond this iron wall, they need to start also treating the rest of the world and the Muslim world, and especially Palestinians, not as like threats that need to be bullied into submission, but like as future neighbors, like a diplomatic approach. But it seems like with what they're doing in Gaza is they're very much still stuck in that iron wall, which is, and they've been like that for probably at least the last 20, 25 years, right? Yeah. So
I've seen a lot of criticism of that, to that effect, essentially, that there were like a lot of diplomats and statesmen who recognize that what Netanyahu has done is essentially set back any possible peace for Israel in the Middle East by another couple of decades. Because I think like you've said, right, the attitude of like, be crazy, fucking be on edge, dare them not to. This is like prison yard strategy shit. North Korea does this, right? With the whole, we're in a position where we feel the only way we can secure ourselves against superior surrounding forces is to just come across as kind of like violent and unstable and always willing to hit harder than you are. And hopefully that deters people. And it's worked for North Korea, to some extent, I guess, in the capacity that they haven't been annexed by the South yet. And it's worked for Israel, I guess, in the sense that they continue to exist. But they had like another option, But that's not an option Netanyahu gives a fuck about, because Netanyahu, his candidacy and power are totally built on him being like the strong man who can muscle the Arabs into not killing everyone. So a diplomatic solution like would not favor him at all. He wouldn't. Like, am I wrong on that? It seems like he would have no reason to exist in that world.
No, he doesn't. Like, as far as like Netanyahu is. No, he's not really up for like a diplomatic solution. Like his whole position has been, we can't negotiate with these people. They're fucking crazy. We just need to be stronger. And then obviously by behaving like that, it doesn't really help in like radicalizing the Arabs even further. And this is why it's, like that's kind of the idea, is that there are people in Israel, and actually like probably even more than most people would think, at least before October 7th, who don't like, who don't have that approach. Like they want settlements to end, or they want to bring back the peace process. But the problem is that at least especially with Hamas there, and with those like rockets constantly coming in and all those terror attacks and the suicide bombings and all that shit, especially October 7th, is that Netanyahu has been able to survive pretty strongly in the last 15, 20 years by saying, yeah, you don't like me. I'm corrupt. I'm like shit. I'm a bad leader, basically. But I'm the security guy. I'll keep you safe,
And he failed in that capacity as well. This clearly hasn't worked out great for his polling numbers.
No, he's never going to get elected again. Whether that means Israelis move further right, I mean, they have for now. Like, I don't know if they'll stay that way. But yeah, I think the problem now is, and this is where I get stuck, is that to be clear, I want what's happening right now in Gaza to stop. I don't think it will, but I don't think anything will make it stop. But it's just, it's not the way. Like Israel don't even, again, I'm sure they've been very vague about what they want to do afterwards, right? Even if they get rid of Hamas, like what next? I think just recently they've been saying they want like a buffer zone, but they don't really know who's going to be doing that buffer zone in Gaza, between northern Gaza and Israel. So whether it's, some have suggested they want the UAE to do it, or maybe Qatar or like the UN, but I don't know who's going to be willing to do that, right? So, and Israel's not going to occupy Gaza, because that would be a disaster as well.
Yeah, so, this is what leads me, I guess, to the sort of doomer conclusions I have here. At some point, I don't know if Biden would put his foot down or whatever. I guess as the PR campaign mounts, it's not as though support for Israel has been great for the Dems either. But the fact that the Israeli government doesn't really seem to have a plan with what they're doing here, which is like, that's not that surprising. We didn't have a plan going into Iraq, right? But I don't think there was ever much of a question about like certain things on the table. Nobody thought America was going to annex Iraq, Nobody thought that like our plans there involved some kind of ethnic displacement. It was very obviously like we had no game plan after we got in there, but certain things were never reasonably on the table. No 51st state bullshit. Whereas here, like, I don't know. And then you have Netanyahu's officials who occasionally say really crazy shit, you know, like they'll say, the nuclear option is not off the table, and then you're not allowed to cabinet meetings anymore because you let it slip that we think that. Or, you know, like there have been multiple officials who have essentially said that Gaza is just Israeli territory, you know, why not annex it? We have videos of IDF soldiers that are like planting flags all over the place with, you know, posts on how like they're reclaiming their land, and you get all the shit. The Israeli cabinet official who was doing those Pallywood conspiracy bits, where it's like, actually, you know, every time you see a dead Palestinian baby, it's CGI, buddy. And you look at all that, and it's like, we've seen this rhetoric before, right? This level of hysteria and like racism and fervor and an ambiguity with the end goal, and it's with the alt-right. The alt-right did all of this. It's because it's like just typical fascist behavior, really. But they were in a position where they had to hide their intentions. And I think Israel does too, at least some Israeli officials, because they know that on the world stage, optically, they can't just literally scream like, yeah, Arabs out, without there being some consequences.
I think on that point, like as for their intentions, I think you're right about definitely some people in the cabinet. Like, they've been open, like Ben-Gvir. He literally had a picture on his wall of like that fucking terrorist who killed 30 people in a mosque, right? Or there was Smotrich who like he wanted that village, that city in the West Bank to get wiped off the face of the earth, right? So yeah, we've had that rhetoric before. I think I might reiterate what I guess like Richard said to you as well. Is like I think with what's happening now. War crimes is almost 100% like a pretty apt charge to put on it. When it comes to ethnic cleansing, like maybe, I guess we're only going to know if it's an ethnic cleansing if they don't let them back, right? Because getting people to evacuate war zones, if you let them go back, like that happens in war. But whether they will, I mean, the buffer zones suggest they might not. As for like, I guess if we're talking about like genocide, then that's like some of the rhetoric definitely points to that, especially from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and whoever the fuck is running the Israeli Twitter account. But I think the thing with that is that, like, unfortunately, with the Middle East, is like rhetoric in just about every war Israel's ever been in, with Israel's from the Israeli side and from the Arab state side, has always been a bit like that. Like but then whether or not it translates into concrete plans, I mean, so far it hasn't. I think at the end of the 6-Day War, when Israel took over Gaza and the West Bank, the cabinet very briefly spoke about expelling everyone from the West Bank and Gaza and just taking it all. They ruled it out because, and that was in the 60s.
A little bit too gamer for them, even at the time, I suppose.
A bit too much, yeah.
It is true that language and conflict in the Middle East, because this is almost always holy war shit. The language almost always trends like pretty apocalyptic and pretty genocidal. Like obviously you'll see the same shit if you listen to Iran or Hezbollah or the Houthis or whatever. You'll hear stuff that, if like applied on a governmental level, would probably be about as bad, if not worse, than what we're seeing the bad members of Netanyahu's cabinet trend towards now. It's really just a matter of, like, you know, being able to actually put it into action, as opposed to it just being you know, ass-mad Iranian-backed militias who are, you know, don't like American presence in the region.
Yeah, and it's ultimately as well is the difference between like the far right of the government and then that sentiment communicating down to the IDF, who are quite a different entity. If you look at like even with Israel, with Israelis, they have like their trust for Netanyahu is like what 10-20%, but their trust for the IDF is like 80. So these are different bodies. And it's also, I guess, like Israel does still recognize that they need the rest of the world to be somewhat okay with them, right? Which is probably why you see all, like every time you see like an IDF person on Twitter, right, doing these videos, they just look so wired, right? Like they just look like so desperate to get the world to understand what they're doing, to the point where I saw a guy showing people like a bag, like a grab bag, a Hamas grab bag, but it was opened and he had the weapons laid out on the table. And he was like, we had to open this because there was the bombs, there was like a bomb check. So, hey, don't give me any of this shit, you guys, about us planting it there. Are you going back to the base and like check and reading the replies on your fucking Twitter account in the middle of Gaza? Like shit.
Literally, these guys are like social media managers first. He was literally like, all right, I see you guys. You're always getting me on pre-opening these bags. Hey guys, I didn't pre-watch watch this video. I promise. I swear. Okay. No, like actually, I've never seen a military effort be so PR conscious and so bad at it at the same time. It's fucking crazy. Yeah, I think stuff like that I feel trends towards sincerity to an extent, because that is a key distinction between the way the IDF officers act and the way, say, like Russian officers have been acting. I do think there are a lot of comparisons that you can draw in terms of sort of willful misinformation. But the one thing that I do consistently get from IDF and Israel advocates and stuff like that, you know, I guess people who I would otherwise argue with pretty severely, is sincerity. A lot of them, I think, even if they're saying stuff that they know in some cases isn't really true, are like, they do believe in something underlying, which I guess in their case would be like Zionism, like defense of the Jewish state. Whereas with Russia, there was this much more nihilistic, like a lack of concern, even for to the extent to which anything they were saying even was truthful. I guess I get the sense that they care more, which kind of tracks with what you said, the idea of like, own up to something but make up the justifications as opposed to lying about it outright, you know? Like Israel could say that only like 1,000 Palestinians have died. I don't think people would believe them, but they could, you know? But instead they'll say like, no, yeah, it's been like 15,000, but half of them were Hamas, you know? Which is a very different style of self-justification, I feel.
Yeah, I don't even know. I think the last video I saw of the guy talking about Hamas deaths was like, I think the 1,500 that they gave initially made sense because there was like 3,000 fires went into Israel, and like I think like half of them died there. But since then they're just saying of like thousands. But that can mean 2,000, can mean 8,000, 5,000. I don't know. But I guess we'll never know because the Gazan health ministry doesn't tell you when a soldier died. They'll tell you what they'll tell you when a militant like a commander dies, like a high profile person. But yeah.
Yeah, it genuinely, it's so fucked, like, to tell, you know? Ukraine has always been pretty straightforward. Like, the defense ministry gives updates on, like, Russian equipment lost, and they're definitely underselling their own deaths, but I think most people agree they're in the ballpark, at least. Like, they're being optimistic. Whereas, like, I have no fucking clue what's going on in the Gaza Strip. There's been a surprising lack of video footage, you know, because they've been trying to keep it quiet. So there haven't been as many videos of like pitched street battles between Hamas insurgents and IDF forces as I would have expected to see. And I don't know how much of that is because it's not happening that much, or if it's because it's not that dramatic, because they'll just airstrike an area into dust and then like cover it, you know? It's really difficult to say. I'm inclined to distrust any numbers Israel provides. But in terms of Hamas deaths, I don't know. Most of them probably fled south, right? Like, that would be the sensible thing to do. You leave some guys up north to make occupation a living hell, but then you set up like the real bulwark in the south where the IDF said to go to because you have more time to prepare.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of them did. I think there were quite a few videos of like people coming out of the tunnels and surrendering, or Hamas were trying to, for the first few days of the ground invasion, Hamas were trying to put their propaganda videos out of like, oh, we came out of a tunnel and shot the tank and the tank's fucked. Like, yeah, but
I saw that one video. That was good. That was pretty funny.
I mean, I think the estimate is they have like 30,000 fighters. But I guess if you're Israel, the
30,000 seems like so much. Would that be all like direct combatants, or could that include, I guess, the Hamas logistics network? You know, just people who do like running or comms or whatever, or would that just literally be like 30,000 guns?
I think it's like membership, yeah. So like 20 to 25. That's I'm just looking at it now again. It's like 20. Well, so Reuters are saying 40,000. Some are saying 20 to 25,000. I don't know. Well, that's membership, so maybe the party is different from the fighters.
Yeah, you know,
that wouldn't surprise me though. Like it's not difficult to find recruits in Gaza.
True, and they probably don't need as much logistically as, you know, a real military would. Make sure everyone has food and ammo, and even then, not that probably.
Yeah. I wonder. I'm trying to think of a few things that I maybe had like some disagreements with or contentions. I guess they're more fucking entertaining for the audience or whatever.
Yeah, I saw some of your bit. I think I had to do a bunch of reading afterwards because I felt like I undersold it a lot. When I was arguing with that dipshit, because you always have to simplify a bit, right? But I think I just
Or
simplified.
libertarian. Yeah.
Yeah, that fucking guy. I think I just simplified wrong. So, it's being able to simplify and be concise while also being correct is pretty important. So I looked up some stuff on like Oslo and the peace accords, and it's only like a fraction of what you've gone over on your stream. So I know there's a lot more complexity to it. I guess I defend the overall premise of what I said, which isn't a defense of any specific inaccuracies, but like the overall feeling that I had and what I was trying to convey and what I still think is that there have been plenty of times in the past where there has been a good faith effort on the part of Palestinian advocates to bring about peace, and that Israel has done a lot to undermine that peace process and sort of like destroy hope in the possibility that diplomatic resolution could, actually get them anywhere.
I think as far as there were good faith efforts for peace from the Palestinian leadership, I'd probably say once, maybe, yeah, which would probably have been between sort of from Oslo leading up to Camp David and Taba. I think here's how I tend to put it is that I think there are three main things that that are kind of universally just like morally what has to happen. It's like, one, Palestinians have a right to self-determination. Two, that refugees have rights, whether it's return or some kind of like resettlement or compensation. And then the third one is that both sides have the right to live in security and peace. So and I feel like when you commit to those three things, the history can tell you how you got to whichever position, but I think as long as you have those three like main values, is you don't really need to defend the worst excesses of Palestinian leadership, because like the way I put it is that at least probably even since the beginning, like since 1917, Palestinians have basically always had the more just cause, like always. It was shit when they had when the British basically betrayed them about their promise to give Arab sovereignty to that area. And then with the Balfour Declaration, it was shit when they had a bunch of like European Jews coming over there and buying up farmland and then evicting all the tenant farmers to replace them with Jewish people. Obviously, 1948 really, really sucked for them.
I've heard rumors of this.
All the way through. Yeah. The problem is that although they had the more just cause throughout, they've also had like the worst advocates, like the worst leaders. Al-Husseini was a Nazi shithead. He wasn't even really like democratically elected or anything. He was appointed by like some weird fucking feudal system. Arafat, for the most part, what his position was, destroy Israel, and every Jew who arrived after 17 is basically like, after 1917 just doesn't like count, right? They can fuck off. And he held that position until like 1988. And then his behavior during the peace process in the Intifada was not great at points. He supported Saddam Hussein going into Kuwait. And then the consequence of that was that Palestinians who lived in Kuwait got kicked out afterwards. And then Abbas right now is useless. Hamas are obviously shit. I think that's the main problem so far, at least from the Palestinian end. You can criticize Israel all day. I think is that the Palestinian leadership has never really, I don't think there's ever been a sustained period where like the person leading the Palestinians has had a good approach towards Israel. I don't know if you have any contention with that, or if you have
No, I think that tracks. I think that some of the, especially early on, a lot of the worse advocacy, not all of it, obviously, because like given the situation here, the whole conversation is going to be underlined by anti-Semitism, even if a person's argument is largely right. Like a person, like there have been plenty of times I think where it's been like, the Palestinian people do not deserve to be oppressed. We have had our land stolen from us. We deserve autonomy, blah, blah, blah. And that's why like Jews are bad and we should kick them out. So there's always been that like hanging clause that's, well, honestly, been really convenient for Zionists because it allows them to point at a lot of legitimate underlying claims and go like, well, you see, they're anti-Semitic, which, they are, but this, yeah, as you pointed out, oftentimes they're really not doing themselves much in the way of favors, argumentatively. I agree with all of that. Of course, my point at the end of it would always be that, like, because Israel is the group with the real autonomy in the situation, that's sort of the whole point. They're the ones with a greater level of responsibility when it comes to framing and dictating the conversation. Insurgency groups, even if they have a good claim, often overstate them, or like bigotry taints the kind of claims they make, because the bigotry and the insanity tends to get sanitized out of the occupying forces processes. Like we saw this with like the IRA, right, where the British did a whole bunch of really fucked up stuff in Ireland and continued to for a long time. And then, if you take a look at like statements made by the British press, it's all very level-headed and sensible, and oh, look at them in their suit and tie. And the IRA will always be framed as the crazies, just as a consequence of their lack of proximity to power, and radicalism tends to foster environments where other alternatives aren't options. So I guess at the end of all of it, I would agree with what you're saying. Yeah, it's just a really difficult situation, and the takeaway that I get from it is not, let's wait for a better Palestinian leader so they can actually do a good job advocating for their just cause. It has to be, Israel has failed to properly facilitate this.
Yeah, at least before October 7th, I probably would have said that the role that the rest of the world could have played there would have been that Mahmoud Abbas, leading Fatah in the West Bank, is like 87 years old. Everyone hates him, but he's not made any effort to get a successor. There are, like, believe it, like, I think this always surprises people, but like people always talk about how popular Hamas are, at least compared to any of the other Palestinian leaders. But the most popular leader in amongst Palestinians is not a Hamas guy. It's a guy from Fatah called Marwan Barghouti. He's done some horrible shit in his life, like during the Second Intifada, and he's in jail now. But like at least there, like there's a leader who is sometimes described as like the Mandela of Palestinians, because he has since spoken out against targeting civilians, and he believes in this idea of like treating Israelis as future neighbors. He doesn't renounce violence completely because it's an occupation. People are going to be violent. You just need to channel it in the right way. It's like, yeah, there is some will there, like the fact that someone like him is actually quite popular. But I guess here's the question for you is, like, do you think any peace process or any advancement can happen now so long as Hamas is still in charge or still exists?
My default answer on this is probably, I think the only way to find out is to give like massive concessions in their favor. The main thing for me would be the West Bank, because they're like the slaughter, I guess not the slaughter, that's not the right term. The bad behavior could stop without meaningfully ceding material power to Hamas. I think that, like, because a lot of the discourse here has been undercut by the fact that with the push and pull in Gaza, like, the slow collapse of the West Bank as a Palestinian settlement has continued, and it kind of gives the indication that, like, Israel can pull back the knife in the Gaza Strip for a time, but their intentions are always clear when you take a look at how they treat the Palestinians broadly. And if that didn't work, right, like if even after that, Hamas continued to successfully galvanize people away from peace, I guess the question would be, how could you make the better argument? What could you do to convince people? How much food or water or provisions or land or power could you give the Palestinian people before the majority of these young Palestinians, and they are young, would think of Israel as a complicated neighbor and not as their oppressor? And maybe something could work out from there. That's what I have to default to, because as you've pointed out, the militant anti-insurgency approach towards Hamas is one that essentially just means doing periodic purges of Gaza Strip. That's how insurgencies are. It doesn't seem to be a working strategy long term, unless you're okay with enormous numbers of deaths.
Yeah, and Hamas doesn't care about that, like, because more Palestinian deaths for them is like,
yeah, free advertising.
Propaganda points. Yeah, they love it. Yeah. I don't know if they love it, but they don't care. Like that's why the leaders are like,
it's martyrdom.
It's
a big jihad thing,
Yeah, but I think I guess the problem now is that if Israel concedes anything now, it's like Hamas wins basically, and that's been, I think that's been the problem a lot to do in the past as well. Is that I think when there are leaders or when there maybe is an opportunity for peace that like a right wing leader in Israel doesn't take, say like Sharon. I think the problem is that when that's what was I going to say? When fuck me, my mind just went completely blank.
It's been known to happen to all of us.
Oh yeah, when like it seems to be the case that like Palestinians have a very good reason to think that like that kind of militancy works for them, right? Say when that peace process happened, the one that I think was maybe the closest that Israelis and Palestinians came towards a final settlement was like it happened in like July 2000, and in May 2000, Hezbollah successfully pushed out a 15-year occupation by Israel. Israel was occupying the south of Lebanon since '85, and Hezbollah just pushed them out violently with no negotiations. So you have like Arafat entering this peace process talk with everyone knowing that Hezbollah achieved a full end of occupation without negotiating anything, without conceding anything. And that's like a really bad place to start, right? And then in 2005, when Sharon came out of Gaza, he did it unilaterally. There was no negotiation. There was no consultancy from the other side. So of course, when they come out of Gaza, Hamas comes in. Hamas is already there. They're quite popular. And then they put up their flags and say, yeah, we did this. They left because we were too violent for them. We were too crazy for them. And like, basically our terrorism achieved more than any negotiation ever will.
Which, to be fair, is correct. If, of course, you have the soldiers to back it up. If a full, like, military rejection of Israel was at any point on the table for Palestinians, I probably would support that over almost anything. Given what's happening now, it seems like all the arguments made by Hamas were correct, that Israel was just biding its time and waiting for the slaughter. Of course, realistically, that's never going to happen. So even like advocacy for it by adjacency, like, you know, oh, if only you had the troops, is kind of like the implication is like, you know, tomorrow you will be able to rise up. When in reality, no. Like the Palestinians lost militarily. It's an unwinnable situation. That'll never change. You can be irritating to your oppressors, but that's not exactly the same as winning your freedom. And Israel has already demonstrated a pretty clear willingness to treat this like, you know, a cut and burn kind of situation with civilian lives. So it's just not working. I think in terms of like moving forward diplomatically, it is true that any concession on Israel's part right now would come across as an optical loss after October 7th. And I mean, ultimately, that's sort of Israel's fault, right? Because the situation was untenable. If you're ever in a position where the people you're oppressing, the only way to stop the slaughter of them is to make yourself look weak, that's probably a situation you were at least somewhat complicit in constructing. I think that Israel would have to be careful to not send the wrong message. Like, you don't want anything that they do to unreasonably bolster the Hamas cause. Now, as for how you'd handle that exactly, I think it has to be like West Bank to begin with, right? Because there's a lot of good stuff you could do in the West Bank that doesn't come across as much as like, oh, haha, you know, Hamas's revolutionary spirit has broken us. Jihad has won. I don't know what exactly it would have to be, though.
It's like I've always wondered about now that we know that a big part of the security failure in the West Bank was because there were just too many. The IDF were just too highly concentrated in the West Bank to deal with settler violence, right? And to deal with fighting over there.
To assist like, settler violence, you know, to give them little high fives,
Yeah, of course. And it's like, I really, like, settlement, this is an argument that I think is like, people should really make more often, is that settlements are not good if you're a Zionist. Like, not really, in the long term. It might feel like winning now because you're getting more territory and you're probably going to annex it, and the Palestinian problem just, I guess, just keeps on pushing into staying on the back burner. But it's like, if you're a proper like Zionist and you want Israel to have a right to exist, the only logical conclusion of settlements is that there's never going to be two states. They can get so embedded that the only way forward is to give is that Palestinians will just demand voting rights. And if they demand voting rights, then you lose your Jewish state because the demographics don't work.
And this is what makes me worry, right? Because it really seems like the only consequence to all this logic is like the only way this all works out, the way the like Ben Gvir types, you know, wanted to, is like, you know, there just need to be no Palestinians. It doesn't seem like their logic allows for their existence, at least not anywhere near Greater Israel.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the position I had before October 7th, but I guess now it's just, assuming they succeed in getting rid of Hamas, I suppose, or assuming something stops, is that I feel like it's really encouraging seeing so many people protest. The problem is I feel like a lot of them just don't know what they want. Like it's all good having loads of protesters, but then I guess ceasefire is a noble thing for them to go for.
At
But
least
generally,
as
when
a
you see a
first
lot of
step,
these,
yeah.
yeah, at least when you see a lot of these protesters, it's always like, oh, what do you want? It's like, oh, river to the sea, abolish Israel, like like it's just all this crazy shit that, like, sure, good luck. It's just not going to happen, like not anytime soon anyway.
Well,
So,
protesters are always like that to an
um,
extent, right? You can even go back to the civil rights movement. If you boil it down, a lot of people are just angry about X or advocating for Y. Certainly with something as complicated as peace in the Middle East, it's pretty tough to like, you can't march till you have your policy position down. Nobody has their policy position down, certainly not Israel.
Well, civil rights protesters, like I think a lot of them did have very clear demands, right? When they boycotted the Birmingham buses, they were like, desegregate the buses. I was like, okay, that's in line with the Constitution. You've got the laws of the land already on your side, like from the federal level. Yeah, but as far as Palestine goes, it's like, yeah, you could be like, I don't know. I just wish there was something more like there was like a more unified front on just like, okay, just stop expanding settlements. Just stop. Okay,
It's got to be the
like, they've been
ceasefire,
pressured
right?
into. Yeah, ceasefire as well. Yeah, yeah.
That's the thing people mostly seem to rally around. I will completely agree with you on the West Bank thing. I think that I said this with Richard as well, which means I guess you probably heard it if you saw that. But so much conversation gets focused on what's going on in the Gaza Strip, in large part because Israel doesn't want you looking at the West Bank, where what's happening is so indefensible, and and Hamas isn't an excuse, which is kind of a sign, right? Like if there wasn't a Hamas, they would need to construct one, which to an extent Netanyahu sort of kind of did. At the very least facilitated one, because in the absence of Hamas in the West Bank, you still get like the systemic displacement and killing of Palestinians aided by the IDF. They're just doing it with like basically no excuse, so I like that. I think that's why I think peace has to start there, because it is true that like even if there was a ceasefire, I think Israel would break it, but I think Israel would break it. I know Hamas would eventually. Give them a day or a week, they would fuck it up somehow. It's Hamas. So
yeah, well, like that 1 week ceasefire, I think Hamas were firing rockets like an hour before it ended. Like it's just, and there was that shooting in the bus stop in Jerusalem, right?
they're being
Isn't
wacky.
isn't that kind of amazing? Like the rockets just haven't stopped.
Oh yeah,
For
well,
all the
from
resources
Hamas's
in Gaza, like yeah, shit.
from Hamas's like they've siphoned so much off to make those rockets, and from their perspective, like this is revolutionary jihad. Like if they're willing to die as good Muslims of Palestine, right? They're sort of roped in on this, I guess, in the Holy War. They're obviously not good shepherds of the future of the Palestinian people. That much is clear. And if a concession made is one that ends up bolstering Hamas, that's probably not a step in the right direction. I guess, like, theoretically, Hamas could end up being a reasonable diplomatic ally of Israel given enough time, because nothing's innate. Things can change. Give it 2 decades, maybe the right leaders switch around. But you're starting from a pretty bad position with Hamas. There are probably easier places to start from when it comes to, like, not having some kind of diplomatic rapport, like the Palestinian Authority or whatever. And, in order for them to exercise their power reasonably, they kind of need to do so. Maybe that would be a good step. Like you could hold you could have like a fuck, what's the term? Like a displaced election. What's the term? Diaspora election, where Israel is like, look, we want a better shepherd of the Palestinian people. We don't recognize Hamas, but like let's allow voting for a Palestinian leader who will operate essentially in exile and like will be the true leader of the Palestinian. This sounds really dumb when I say it. I feel like there's a way to do this right, basically, because obviously we don't want Hamas there forever.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
think,
There's a term for that, like Taiwan, except Taiwan, of course, ended up just becoming right. But a better Taiwan too.
I think that's like because obviously Hamas were not that popular when they were formed. I think like 3% of Palestinians supported them. Up through the peace process, they had like maybe 10-15%, and they boycotted the first election in the 90s, but they would have got about 10-15%. It's not that much. It seemed to be the case that when Arafat, from the 80s onwards, late 80s, said that he would recognize Israel and denounce terrorism, it seemed that if there was going to be some reward for that, like the Oslo Accords and like the Palestinian government, then Palestinians were up for that. They embraced that with a lot of optimism, and I think Arafat in the first election got like what 90% of the vote on that platform on the Oslo Accords, like fair election, and then the problem is I guess like partly like Arafat was just a fucking moron. I don't know what the fuck he was smoking throughout that period. Also,
Should have watched more of your
it
live
seemed to be
streams.
that. Yeah, well, it seemed. Yeah, it also seemed to be the case that there was a lot. I think it just showed you how little it took to throw things off course. You know, the Oslo Accords are signed in '93. Rabin, the Israeli lefty guy who signs them, gets assassinated by a right winger with a bit of stochastic incitement from Netanyahu. There are like some riots in fucking no. There's that guy who goes into the mosque and shoots up like 30 people, the Israeli guy in the West Bank. And then that basically pushes Hamas to go full on pro-suicide bombing and killing civilians, which they do. That gets Netanyahu elected. Netanyahu builds a fucking tunnel that links the Western Wall into the Muslim quarter. The Muslims get very angry. There's a riot. And in response to that riot, the IDF in the West Bank basically starts arming up to fuck. And then the Palestinian militants do the same. And then obviously Hezbollah kicks out Israel in 2000. So all the Palestinians are like, wait, fuck, negotiations are shit. We should actually use violence. It's like, it just takes so little to throw things off. But it's just almost like if there wasn't this like horrible constellation of events, like things might have been different, you know?
Yeah, it's there's no getting around the fact that we're not starting, but from here we're starting from a fucked position. It's not really a fair hand. The conditions that make this almost impossible to manage are ultimately, I think, changeable, at least to some extent, from Israel. Like, obviously locking up everyone in the West Bank and fencing them in and keeping them in not the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, and then having like the apartheid system that they have in the West Bank. These are all like essentially guaranteed to foster distrust in a way that will make the Palestinians incredibly hostile to what they perceive as a disingenuous attempt at brokering peace, even in the best of times. I think a government in exile of kind would be nice. It'd be nice to like replace Hamas with something, because right now the basic message just seems to be like, we let the Palestinians get too rowdy and they went and did jihad. So, you know, we, the Jews, the responsible ones, we are coming in to, you know, to sort of shepherd, to knock them down, to make things reasonable again. And I mean, Hamas is unreasonable, so I don't disagree with that. I guess it would just be nice to be able to point to like the Palestinian Authority or some other adjacent org and go like, oh yeah, see, here we go. Like, these are the people we think should be leading in the Gaza Strip, and we will provide resources. We will, through them, we will grant like aid and medicine and stuff. And they will like distribute it to you, and we'll like use this as to like facilitate a peace process, to broker a kind of mutual trust. And that wouldn't fix it on its own, but I don't know. I mean, steps have to be taken, right? Like, it's either that or the Palestinians go bye-bye. So it's clearly something has to be done. I don't know. It makes me so uncertain. The certainty of the Ukraine war is it's so different in comparison, right? Like, good guys, bad guys, and then like, well, what's the good situation, right? Well, you know, the Russians get kicked back. Great. It's very straightforward. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't really help Palestinians all that much that their allies are just so horrible as well. Like,
Hezbollah,
not
Iran.
Houthis. Like, yeah, wow, you're gonna go really far with the Houthis helping you.
Fucking the Avengers assembling to defend and of course, obviously, none of them give a shit about Palestinians. The Houthis, the Iranian government, you know, none of them actually. Egypt, certainly not Egypt. The extent to which they care is just like a convenient cudgel that they can use to blame Israel for this or for that, even if they're correct in blaming Israel for, you know, for this or for that. Like, it's obvious they don't actually care. Like, Egypt isn't taking in Palestinian refugees. Iran's only willing to help in the form of like fucking bottle rocket supplies. It's bullshit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Someone mentioned in your chat as well. I think you said this as well. There was one thing I definitely wanted to correct one thing from that debate that you had.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that Israel like funded Hamas, right, or created or put Hamas in there, or like helped it. Like, that's not necessarily true. The origin of Hamas was that they were a charity in Gaza, a spin-off of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1973. They were called Islamic Center, and they built a university, they funded mosques and healthcare and welfare and all that kind of shit.
That was nice of them.
And in that period, they were completely nonviolent. They were very anti-violent. And in that period, that was the one period where it was an Israeli brigadier who was the governor of Gaza, who had a budget for charities, and he recognized Islamic Center as a charity, and then gave them a small budget, like it was just some money. That pretty much ended when Hamas, when the guy was found stockpiling weapons in one of the mosques. And then he was arrested. He was released very quickly after as part of a prisoner exchange, because that's how they usually do it. And then they became Hamas in 87. But since they've become Hamas, I think the mistake people say that Israel made was that they ignored the Hamas threat because they were focused on the PLO. That's definitely a legitimate criticism. It's also, but as far as them supporting, the only time Israel ever supported Hamas was when they were a non-violent charity. And it's like, that kind of makes sense because like the people who were doing lots of violence against civilians at the time was the PLO, right? So it would always make sense that you want your opponents to be non-violent and charitable, right? So
unless you're Netanyahu,
it's a whole misconception. Yeah.
In which case, the situation reverses, and it's pretty optically beneficial for Hamas to be the unreasonable jihadist lead of the Palestinian people. No?
And there's that quote from Netanyahu where he says that if you oppose the Palestinian state, you should be okay with Hamas, or you should help Hamas. But even with Netanyahu, the one bit of evidence we have of his involvement with Hamas money is that he, in between 2013 and 18, might be slightly off for those years, was he didn't give Hamas money. He allowed Qatari money to go through into Gaza because I think it was the PA in the West Bank had held back on funds that were going into Gaza. And Netanyahu's reasoning for doing that wasn't just the whole divide and conquer thing. It was also because that was funding that was plugging a gap for humanitarian aid. So I think the other part of that Netanyahu quote is saying it was actually okay. It was better that we were observing it because we knew it was going to humanitarian causes. It turned out now that intelligence officials believe that some of it was getting funneled into weapon manufacturing, but that's not him. That's not giving money. That's just like, yeah. And I don't really like that talking point though, because it's like, it's a right-wing point, right? It's right-wingers who got angry that Netanyahu was allowing humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, because the right-wingers are like, well, if you give Hamas some fuel for their heating bills, they'll use them for rockets, right?
Right. Yeah. If you give them water pipes, they'll cut them up and they'll use them for their bottle rockets and such. Okay. No, I appreciate the clarification. Since we're on the topic, could you clarify, or I guess since you know more than me in the subject, the other big thing that I remember with regards to the claim that Netanyahu wanted or brought about Hamas in some respect was that there has been very aggressive labeling of non-military organizations in the Gaza Strip as being terrorist organizations, when even the UN has said, like, hey, why? You know, I forget the exact names of the orgs, but it's been like a consistent process of like, it seems like Netanyahu's regime doesn't want there to be a civil society or an authority in the Gaza Strip outside of Hamas, presumably because humanitarian orgs sort of like complicate the narrative and also give them the ability to kind of invite international attention. I would need to go look up the names of those orgs. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Is this like the whole charity? It's like similar to this charity scandal, isn't it? It's like, oh no, these guys. Is that what you mean? Like the certain charitable orgs and different donors will go to Hamas money? Is that what you mean? Or?
I think it was as recent as like 2020, where the UN was even asking, like, hey, why were these labeled as terrorist organizations? And my impression from that was that Netanyahu's administration kind of wants Hamas to be the only game in town in the Gaza Strip, because that makes the narrative really clean for him. You know, there's not like a bunch of different groups operating in the Strip. There's just the evil jihadists, which, I mean, Hamas are. So yeah, I would need to look up specifically what the names of the organizations are. Israel. I was just wondering if you knew anything about that. I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that Netanyahu has politically benefited enormously from the instability and threat posed by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, because that's just classic strongman shit. Strongmen need a threat to, like, you know, point at and go, this is what I can protect you from. The question then is, like, to what extent has he sort of deliberately cultivated that environment? I do appreciate you clarifying the funding thing. I guess now it would be a matter of like softer assistance, like kind of clearing the path a bit.
Yeah, and I think another one of his failures was that he, uh, as part of that humanitarian aid going to Qatar, because they knew that Israel was allowing it to go through. The I think that was around the same time was that there were border protests at the Gaza wall, and they stopped around the time when that funding went through. So it's very possible that Netanyahu was sitting there thinking that he had actually bought some quiet from Hamas because Hamas organized the protests.
Here, oh,
Yeah,
I found it. Sorry. It was from 2021. It was UN human rights experts take strongly and unequivocally condemn the decision by the Israel Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, to designate 6 Palestinian human rights and civil society orgs as terrorist organizations. I'm sure the details on these specifically are pretty like nuanced, That's just the impression that I got from this, I guess. The idea of trying to cultivate kind of like an environment where Hamas is the only like voice that really comes out of the Gaza Strip. I didn't know if that was like misinfo on my part, but I stand by the mistake I made with the funding.
Yeah, I haven't looked into what you're talking about specifically, so I'd have to look.
No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
It was tangential. Yeah. Wait, sorry. By stand by my mistake, what I mean is I acknowledge it. Not that I'm right. Yeah.
I will keep making mistakes.
Thank you. I will keep making mistakes. I will keep concluding. Thank you.
Yeah.
And no, seriously, I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you though, because I've made a lot of declarative statements in terms of like what can be done moving forward. If you were, I don't know, if you could psychically take control of Netanyahu or whatever, I don't know. What direction would you want to go?
Right now, I could have answered this so much easier before October 7th. So maybe I'll just say what I would say then. Is like, I feel like if you're Netanyahu, you have to go, right? And you have to get a government in there that is actually serious about peace talks, because Netanyahu is not. I think it's just to put something on the table that's like, okay, here's what we're going to do with regards to the borders, land swaps. Here's what we're going to do with regards to refugees. Here's what we're going to do with Jerusalem. And it's like, just have that on the table so that at least a Palestinian leader can be like, well, I'm going to speak to Israel about this, right? So I guess things would be like a settlement freeze would be a start. Then it would be things like trying to negotiate with a Palestinian leader to do something like dismantling outposts. Do you know what outposts are?
In the West Bank?
Yeah.
I assume you mean like the little like civilian pockets that they construct, and then they do the like, well, we need the IDF to defend these pockets, so we need a little bit more area around them. That thing?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, they're settlements that aren't even considered legal by Israel. It's just people going in on their own accord, setting up usually what are like tents or modular homes or caravans. And those are the craziest religious nutcases who are usually the ones who are responsible for all the violence and throwing rocks at Palestinians and blocking their roads and cutting off their water. Yeah, those guys.
The Ben Gvir Hoover
Ben Gvir militant. Yeah. Ben Gvir's little fucking troop.
Yeah. Did you read that the interview? I forget which publication it was put in, but it was the one with one of those famous Israeli settlers. She's been arrested a few times, and it was basically just her doing like Deus Vult shit over Palestinians the whole interview. But it was like crazy how upfront she was about it.
Wait, sorry, say that again.
She was like talking about how like I don't care about Palestinian children dying. I have my own children to care about. She's been one of the more like active settlers. I forget her name, but there was like an article that came out a little while ago that I read on stream, and it was pretty wacky. So it was a little wacky. Like settlers in general are a little bit more weird, but yeah, those ones in particular are just absolutely fucking insane. She was like crazy for them. I think she was really out there.
And as far as Israel goes, it's like that's you enforcing your own laws, right? Because Israel doesn't consider those outposts legal. Like they should just occasionally they get rid of them, and occasionally they get rid of them, and they give little pictures to the UN, say, look, we're doing a good job. But a lot of them, most of them stay. So that's like a big thing. Definitely, like, I don't know, start convicting settlers of crimes like properly, not just like 1 year if they shoot like 2 people, because that happens a lot. Yeah. They're very, very soft on crime, unfortunately, and I'm personally hard on crime, so fuck it. Yeah. Like as for right of
Law
return,
and Order live stream here.
Yeah. As for right of return, I think Israel they should just recognize it. Like, just say, yeah, 1948 ethnic cleansing, we did that. Sorry, and then and that just opens the door to some negotiation that can be amicable to both sides. I think them recognizing it is just like that's just a point of history, right? It's not like a political negotiation, right? It's just like the government narrative on it is just very much. Yeah, this was actually fine because the Arabs were going to genocide us, right? So it's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
at least
they need to change that. Like, just catch up with your own historians, you know? Like, yeah,
acknowledge like I guess like a shared language for future peace, you know, so we can at least agree on what even happened. I think, yeah, the shit with the outpost reminds me a lot of like reading about sundown towns or like clan towns in the American South for a while, where like everyone knew what was going on. You would ask the local sheriff, and he'd be like, "Well, I ain't heard nothing of that." Wink, you know. But like, you know, obviously, it's like they know and they kind of agree with what's being done. I don't think everyone in the Israeli government agrees with the situation in the West Bank. Of course, I just think that with Netanyahu being in power and Ben Gvir being in power, the non-hardliners have either been ousted or aren't even in a position where any of their advocacy would do very much. Certainly not after October 7th, right? Like, holy shit. It's like what the US government's been doing, the House resolution today, where they're like, yeah, actually, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Fuck you. And can you imagine in this environment?
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not good. In this environment, being like even remotely sensible in government, you know, like Rashida Tlaib got censured by the House. She, you know, it takes so little.
Yeah, they also got all those, like, you know, the anti-BDS laws. I think it's like 27 states where you can't organize a boycott against Israel. Yeah, which is a fucking free speech country. You guys are fucked. Great. Yeah. Yeah, and it just shows you guys that there are legal groups in America that fight against that. I think PAL Legal is one of them. Yeah, and I don't really know as far as like how widespread a BDS campaign could be. Oh, that's maybe another thing as well, as far as activism goes and like what to support and all, like what kind of actions to support and all that. Because I guess you've been one of the maybe few online leftists, at least on Twitter,
embraced jihad,
like not happy with Hamas, right?
Oh yeah.
Fuck
yes.
me.
Yeah.
It's like I think with advocating, it's like BDS is part of the story. I think people always have this impression of like South Africa, for example, where it was just a lot of BDS and a lot of like, I guess, terrorism from Mandela, and then that like destroyed the apartheid state. But I think ultimately what happened, and this is what I'm trying to change in my approach a little bit as well, is that South Africa didn't just fall because of BDS and because of the ANC, right? It was also because of the way that the ANC approached their activism and their resistance, was that you needed it ultimately had approval from the white population as well. I think in 1992, a lot of people don't know this, is that just before apartheid was properly ended, there was a referendum held for the white population where they were offered the opportunity to reject the negotiations, and they said no. Like 60+% of them, of the white population, actually favored continuing the talks to end apartheid. And the reason they were okay with that and they weren't worrying about like white genocide or any shit like that was because Mandela took an approach that I don't think we've ever seen from Palestinian movements, which is that they didn't target civilians ever. Like it was never a policy of it. When civilians were killed by their fighters, it was condemned and people were reprimanded for it. So the idea there was that Mandela's strategy was to target like infrastructure. Because the idea was that we don't want this system to be sustainable. We need to make the country ungovernable. But by targeting infrastructure and generally making every effort to leave the civilians alone, they were also sending that message, like with Desmond Tutu, like the idea of the Rainbow Nation, right? The idea that white people have a future in South Africa, that they won't get like it won't be like Zimbabwe, right, where Mugabe just takes away all the farmland and gives it to his friends.
To be fair, he did lie about that too. He was also wacky guy for
yeah.
So, I think the situation's a bit tougher here because in South Africa, black people were like vastly the majority, whereas the Palestinians have been very effective. Like like, you know, not to be grim, I guess, but like Israel, if the world went dark on Israel and nobody was peering in, and Israel had like a free week or two, you know, they could essentially just slaughter the entire Gaza Strip. It wouldn't cost Israel much logistically and economically. They don't rely on the population of the Gaza Strip. They have some like workers on visas, but for the most part, like they could do that. Whereas with South Africa, the black population there knew for a fact that they were indispensable because they made up, the vast majority of the labor force. So I understand there being a lot less confidence in that strategy from the part of the Palestinian people, but unfortunately, I still think it's the right one. I still think that like you do have to do that, right? Because A, it makes it a lot harder to attack you if you have like a clear message on that, and B, it sort of, I guess, invites international scrutiny even more in your favor whenever things don't work out in the peace process. It is definitely not to Palestinians' benefit when it comes to international recognition that Hamas speaks for them. That doesn't help them out. It does remind me a little bit, I think, of the way lefties sometimes misconstrue the civil rights movement relationship between MLK and Malcolm X, where they'll say correctly, like MLK's strategy relied on Malcolm X because, Malcolm X was like, it's sort of like the wedge that allowed MLK to kind of sort of implicitly gesture at as a consequence of not improving race relations. And that's true. But then they'll take another step too far and they'll go like, actually, Malcolm X was the smart one. MLK was dumb and naive for working with the white establishment. Malcolm X, and then it's like, no, hold on. MLK did way more than Malcolm X did for peace. They worked together, I guess, like in a historical sense, towards a shared outcome. But the idea that it was like a naivete versus intelligence thing is total bullshit. But a lot of people seem to believe that. So
here's what
kind of rambling. My apologies.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, but here's what I want. What did Malcolm X actually do? I used to be really scared to ask that question, right? But he was like fucking around with the Nation of Islam until 2 years before he died. Like he gave speeches and he wrote letters, like from up in the north. Like what the fuck did he do? Like he didn't participate in violence himself. Whereas MLK, and his guys were literally throwing themselves like on the line and getting them beaten the shit out of by cops and shit. Malcolm X, he talked pretty well, he was good at shit posting. But what the fuck did he do? Yeah, I guess it was like helpful for MLK to, and like in the Birmingham jail letter was to be like, you know what, if you guys don't give us what we want, it's going to be like more people are going to want to join the nation, and that'll be really, really bad. But apart from that, yeah,
he had a big Twitter account. Yeah. He was a popular shit poster. Now, I think the main thing he did was that as a contrast. I think that he was someone to point to. I think he fucked up a lot. I mean, the Nation of Islam shit literally got him killed. So, that's not much of an argument in favor of that. I think the main, I guess I'm kind of like speaking positively here because I guess I'm fond of a lot of what not what he stood for. He did a lot of stupid shit. I'm fond of a sort of idealized, simplified version of him. And I think that idealized, simplified version of him that I hold in my mind and nowhere else was an effective wedge, a good direction to point in as an indication of where things could go if race relations weren't improved, and as a scholar and an educator to other people in his proximity, mostly with regards to the value of that kind of resistance and how it should be framed alongside peaceful resistance. After all, we do know that MLK, got something from what he said. I'd like to believe that you could learn from his failures, if nothing else. Maybe that's the real, if anything, that's kind of like the historical value of leftism in general. It's just learning from failure. So in that tradition, at least, he's a true blue leftist.
Yeah, I know there was one, I think during the fair housing protests, there was one of the worst towns. I think it was Michigan. I think where the riots were the worst. It was the worst place one of the worst places for riots. But they also ended up getting the most generous fair housing bill. But I guess that's I don't know. That's
a lot of people learn from him,
but then also, yeah. But then Detroit, sorry, yeah. But then it's also the fact that I guess you could also say the MLK riots gave you Nixon. So I guess it's yeah. But as far as I'm not advocating for Palestinians to do non-violence because it's not the same as the United States. They can't do it's not getting beaten. It's not cops beating you up, right? It's people killing you and shit. I don't know. I just wish it was channeled in a more productive way. I personally feel I have no issue with if there's an outposter, right, building up a settlement. Or building a modular home in the West Bank. I think those people absolutely deserve to have some ski mask paraglider come over and just knock out their water supply.
A paraglider to every settler.
Just tear down, I don't know, tear down the house, or tear down the stupid little caravan or rip down their tent and just chase them back into Israel, you know? As for the bigger communities, like I don't even know if I'd be against people like doing what some of the settlers do to them, which is like blocking the roads or messing up with the infrastructure and things like that, you know, not killing them or anything like that, but just unless they try to kill you. But like, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like that kind of approach would be, and they've had moments like that in the past, I guess, like in the first Intifada, where a lot of the imagery that went out was like 5-year-olds throwing stones at tanks. And that was like, it made Palestinians look very sympathetic on the world stage where Arabs usually weren't. But then you have like the second Intifada, which is like every other day there's a suicide bombing in Israel. And it's usually like they went to a pizza shop and they made sure it was lunchtime, so it was really busy and there were a bunch of families in there and blew it up. It's like, yeah, I feel like one method definitely gains a lot more support than the other.
You have to get a lot of 5-year-olds and a lot of rocks. It turns out suicide bombings just aren't that sympathetic on the global stage. No one has informed Hamas of this, but God willing, one day. No, I completely agree. Yeah, I wonder if I mean, no, I guess nobody, probably including the Biden and Netanyahu administrations, know how this specific situation is going to turn out. I hope that I guess I hope there's even like a future for the dynamic as opposed to it being irrevocably ended vis-a-vis genocide. Do you think there's a decent chance that Israel's even like not even going to remain a democracy? Because the shit that they've been putting out lately, the like constitutional amendment on terrorists sympathizing and the general kind of strongman bullshit you get during wartime, I don't know.
I think I stopping democracy or genocide. I feel like both of these things are maybe a very long ways away because, like, I mean, I guess we're in unprecedented territory. I don't want to say anything's impossible, right? and I don't know. I couldn't even tell you what's going to happen next week, let alone. But I think both of those are still quite far away. And I feel like Israel's dealt with I don't know if they've dealt with worse, but they've dealt with a lot more. They still have Egypt at peace with them, right? They didn't used to have that. They have Jordan at peace with them. Their enemies are probably a bit less powerful than they used to be. So, I don't know. I don't think it's very likely, but I'll never say it's impossible. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think with regards to the genocidal thing, I guess it's really a matter of, do we get like the kind of soft ethnic cleansing variety where they're never allowed to return, or the Gaza Strip is reoccupied by Israel, or you know, like everyone's displaced or whatever, or do you get like the very fast, everyone gets pushed further and further south until they're up against Egypt, and Israel is putting international pressure on Egypt to open its borders to allow them, and then a bunch of people just like flee into the desert, and then just sort of like 500,000 people die in 2 weeks in the middle of nowhere, and you know, and then later some journalist like goes over like a sandy dune with like 16 skeletons on it or something. I don't know. I really hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, Egypt's very, very unlikely to let people through Rafah unless the border gets stormed. And I think what's maybe more likely to happen is either the civilian death count just gets so high that Israel's choice is either continue or lose support from the rest of or continue, or you don't lose support from every country on earth, maybe. Or they might even succeed in taking all of Gaza and having like IDF presence from north to south, and then they're just stuck there occupying, but no one else wants to take control of it, and that would be a pretty rough situation. That'd be horrible. But I don't know whether that leads to genocide. I don't know. It would be new if they did that.
I think we could just take on
maybe the UN, maybe an Arab country. Like I don't know. Fuck.
We can just take on all 2.3 million of them. You know, we're a European, or sort of like Western / European country. Our birth rates are flagging. We just need 2 million like young people to shore us up.
Though I have seriously considered building a second Israel in Wyoming. I don't know why. You guys have so much fucking space.
We've got so much room. They're all fighting over one fucking Holy Land. Jesus Christ. The Mormons had the right idea. Okay, the Holy Land is actually here, where there's lots of open space. Have fun.
Yeah, it's not even very good land.
Yeah, no, it's really not. Pretty though. I've seen photos. Looks nice.
Yeah.
I know what the soil irrigation is like there. Does Israel have to import all of its crops? Where do they get the farmland? I don't even know.
No, they have farmland. Yeah, that was like that's the whole Zionist thing where they're like, we came here and we drained swamps and we made them into farms. I mean, they kind of did do that a little bit, but yeah, yeah. No, they definitely have their pretty areas.
I guess because I'm
Um,
American, when I think of the Middle, like just anywhere in the Middle East, I just instantly picture like the Sahara Desert, which isn't in the Middle East, and I just that's
yeah,
immediately where my mind goes to.
I think coming maybe one more thing on I guess like the genocide point is like I think the way I kind of approach it is as well as just not thinking it's the most accurate description of what they're doing, but like it's the way I see it is like I think the big problem with why Israelis like are the way they are, right? Because they're quite wacky, and I think it's mostly because of fear. I think it's because from basically birth, the whole story is that like, listen, you're Jewish, and you know what happens for being Jewish is you get killed by fucking everyone. You know, you were kicked out by the English, the Ottoman, like everyone treats you like shit. Then the Nazis, and then like you came to Israel, where the leader of the Palestinians there was also a Nazi. It's like they're everywhere. Like that's the idea is that everyone hates them. You know, the UN hates you because there's like 50 Muslim countries and one Jewish country in the UN. Like that they constantly drill this into people. And I think at least I've noticed is that I guess because I spent the first week of the conflict shitting on Hamas leftists, is that a bunch of like Israelis and progressive Jews came into my community. And I think what they like their positions, although I don't really agree with most of what they say, like it does matter what they believe. And I think as far as like this very small contribution I guess I can make like with streaming and all that is like at least showing people who are like either Israeli or Jewish progressives, because the Venn diagram, people say, I don't think Zionism equals anti-Semitism, but the Venn diagram between Jewish and Zionists is quite close, right? Like most of the world's Jews have some sympathy for the state of Israel, or some connection, or feel some connection to it, or something like that, right? So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's there's some value in uh, allowing like Jewish progressives or like people who are more progressive on the Israeli side to feel like they're not really alone. Because as far as progressive spaces go right now, a lot of Jewish progressives like outside of Israel feel very, very alienated.
Yeah,
Right?
that
Because they're surrounded. Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. I think that concerns about anti-Semitism on the left are valid but often overstated cynically. However, in this specific instance, I feel like a lot of people on the left seem to have like forgotten that anti-Semitism is a real issue, because so in the American government, like in the capacity of official American legislation, anti-Semitism is not that big of an issue. They're pretty militantly Zionist over there. You know, not many bills coming out denouncing Judaism. In terms of
Yeah.
like America broadly or like the world broadly, huge threat level, and Israel's not helping things. So you like, for instance, right now, like if you take a look at Twitter, right? What hate do you see on Twitter? Are there like IDF so-and-sos being Islamophobic? Are there liberals doing this and that? Yes, of course. But there's also a lot of basically open neo-Nazis who are LARPing as pro-Palestinian as a way
Mm-hmm.
of boosting their accounts. Jackson Hinkle, who isn't a Nazi because you have to believe something to be a Nazi and he believes nothing, but is still a bad person, is literally like the most engaged account on Twitter right now on the Palestine stuff. And there are a bunch of dumbasses who are engaging with it like, oh yeah, this guy must sincerely care about Palestinian people. There is a lot of this. I think I saw a post recently talking about how much certain accounts, like known anti-Semitic accounts, have been boosted lately, and it's huge. And it's like, shit, yeah, in the context of all of this, like, I don't know. I don't want anything that I say to be misconstrued as a kind of like blasé dismissal of generational trauma on the part of Jews, because it's not even generational. Like that shit's still going on. It's just the Israel thing kind of throws a wedge in it in terms of like how it's perceived immediately. I don't know. I fucking hate this. I hate the whole like recursive oppressor effect where you have the Jews on
Mm.
the Palestinians, but then there's the Arabs around the Jews who would eradicate Israel if they could. No denying it. And then you have like the anti-Semites in the West, and a lot of whom are pro-Israel because it's politically expedient. And it's just, yeah, fucking.
It's so difficult to tell exactly where everyone aligns as well, because I saw Tommy Robinson leading like a pro-Israel march right now, because I guess like as soon as a Muslim comes into the room, the fascists and the Jews are all good, you know. The fascists are all good with the Jews, and
Him
it's the
in
same with
particular,
like
I assume, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's just like Yeah, it gets. I think with left-wing anti-Semitism, I think the problem is that left-wing anti-Semitism doesn't have anything to do with anti-Semitism. Really, left-wingers are not anti-Semitic, and they don't believe the protocols. They don't believe in blood libel or any of this bullshit, right? But they are so anti-American that I like so campist that that they'll support anyone that opposes Israel because Israel's America's biggest ally. I think that's why they do it. And then the consequence of that is that they will run cover for people who are anti-Semitic, right? Like Hamas, because they oppose Israel.
Because like anti-imperialism by proxy, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that's what leads them to feel like, well, I'm not like. That's why it also appears that on the other end, that people are so hyper vigilant, like on the Jewish side, that a lot of people just look like they're seeing anti-Semitism everywhere, right? Whereas it's not all. It expresses itself in very different ways across different groups.
And, yeah, a lot of them, of course, like I think misidentify it, but at the same time, the misidentification gets a lot harder when you have actual real anti-Semites who are defending Hamas as a way of wedging Israel. Like Nick Fuentes said this, you know? So in that environment, it's like, oh, well, hold on, maybe this all is a fucking thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so Fuentes is a big Hamas freedom fighter. Yeah, I wouldn't surprise. Yeah, and that's always, you know, because again, like Hitler had reasonably good relations with a lot of Arab leaders. You know, not all of them, but some. There was like a pogrom in like Algeria that was inspired by occupying Nazis. The Muslim leaders opposed it, but yeah, like it's quite, yeah,
it's not. It's not.
But
good.
I guess that this is also maybe the reason. I think I maybe heard you do this once. And I know it's maybe just because it's what you like to do, comparing people to Nazis, right? I think you're talking to that IDF person. You're talking to that IDF person, and I think you said it seems like you guys just want to kill all the Palestinians, and she's like, "Listen, most Israelis don't want to kill all the Palestinians." And you were like, I think you said, fuck, I tried to remember this, but you said, well, the Germans said they didn't want to kill the Jews. I'm like, I feel like that's maybe an example of where I think you just get kind of like into that alienation of like comparing Israelis to Nazis is, I think the fascist claim against people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, I don't care that much about, but like, I think to me, using that rhetorical thing I don't think it's done in aid of accuracy. The Nazis were, I don't even like people comparing Soviets to Nazis because Nazis were just so exceptionally bad with what they were, even like the difference between their policies in Eastern Europe. But yeah, I think, I don't think it's done with like innate accuracy. I think really functionally, the only thing that plays for like comparing Israelis to Nazis is that like, maybe it helps you get under the skin of Jewish people, but like, yeah.
Well, to be fair, under the skin of everyone, I do it too, which is everyone. Yeah, obviously, in terms of like by any like consequential analysis, there's not really comparing the Nazis to much of anything. You know, you've got something in the ballpark with Stalin, Mao, but yeah, no, not with Israel. Usually, the reason I do it is because I don't think the Nazis are that exceptional ideologically. I think that in terms of what they actually did, they were exceptional in the most negative possible way. Obviously, I would hope it goes without saying. But in terms of like the underlying logic of ethnic supremacy, a desire for like one's original homeland, the idea that a grand conspiracy against your people is being blah 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 blah, all that bullshit. That's like just conservatism taken farther. Like that's pretty common. Seriously, like throughout history, go back millennia, right? You know, you can find treatises on this shit. It's not that uncommon, you know? So I evoke it a lot, I guess, because it's like you know, what underlying logic is being used here. I did this a lot with like the black separatists too, where they were pulling out a lot of the same like anti-Semitic conspiracies about Hollywood producers controlling black art in the service of their like own brand of conspiracy theories. In terms of like actual effectiveness, though, yeah, that in this specific instance, it's probably worth toning down. Though I do stand that Ben Gvir is Ben Gvitler. He's that motherfucker is purely on their side by historical circumstance. You know what I mean? Ideologically, there is not a lot that separates that guy from the worst of them.
I'm pretty sure he is like he's a Middle Eastern Jew, isn't he?
I think
he's like a Sephardic or Mizrahi. Yeah,
I don't think he's from Europe.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people don't know that the majority of Israelis are non-white, and it's also I find it funny when people talk about like Israel being like a white supremacist state or like I wonder how much the like the really crazy left opinions on Israelis would change if they knew that the majority, not just the majority of Israelis are non-white, but also actually because the strongest right-wing voting blocs in Israel, I think, are the Orthodox Jews, and then it's the Middle Eastern and North African ones. And like they're actually more right-wing, I think, than the Ashkenazis. They're really right-wing. And there's I guess the reason for that is like there's one because they arrived as refugees from the Arab world just after the Nakba from all over North Africa and Eastern Europe, and they when they arrived in Israel, they felt like they were treated very unfairly. Like they weren't given as good housing and they weren't treated very well just at all. They were always like kept out of higher professions and things like that. But the Israeli leaders who were doing that to them were labor Zionists. They were left-wingers. At least they said they were left-wingers. And so that's one reason that they don't like the left. But the other thing is, as well, is they don't like Arabs at all because they feel like they were Arab Jews at one point, but then they were just basically discriminated and persecuted and chased out of the Middle East. That's why you look at every other Middle Eastern country and North Africa. It's like, oh, they used to have like 100,000 Jews, and now they have 8. Or like in Afghanistan with the last 2 Jews. They don't even like each other.
It's one of those historical complexities where, again, like discount. It's a really bad idea to discount, I guess, the paranoia or fear or concern that a lot of Jewish people have in or out of Israel, that the world really is out to get them, because they have a lot of historical, they have a lot of history that they can use to supplement that claim. Very difficult to argue against, at least for now. I think, I know that they've done some colorist stuff in Israel, but to be fair, that's not like Israel unique. I'm pretty sure that's the entire fucking planet. Like white supremacy is global, so there's always going to be a kind of latent undercurrent. They did this recently, I think, in Nigeria, where there was like, they had to pass a law because like almost all of the models that were selling beauty products, clothing, makeup, like anything, were white or European, when basically everyone in Nigeria is black. And it was because they were trying to because a lot of these companies are international. So, you sell like white beauty everywhere. And like in India, they do the skin lightening surgery and blah, blah. So yeah, that's pretty much the case across the board. It is definitely true though, that Israel isn't a white supremacist state in the same way that, I don't know, MAGA Republicans want to do a white supremacist state. Like those definitely mean different things. Certainly with regards to acceptance of Jews, which I'm just hearing a lot of white fascists don't like that much.
Yeah, they tend not to. Also, sorry, a few people in your chat were saying this idea about Israel sterilizing Ethiopian Jews. They didn't sterilize them. What happened was there was a transit center in Ethiopia where Israel was evacuating Ethiopian Jews to Israel. So they were taking them in, but they spent a good while in these transit centers. And in the transit centers, those Ethiopian Jews couldn't speak Hebrew. There was a lot of mistranslation going on. And the idea is usually in a transit center is like you try to give people contraception because having a baby in a transit center fucking sucks. But the communication was so poor that it was basically uninformed consent. So these people were given contraceptives that periodically that they didn't want. And when it came to Israel, because the doctors didn't communicate properly either, they started giving it to them there because they just thought it was part of what they agreed to. But as soon as they found out, they reprimanded people and they stopped. Right?
To be fair, that's really, pretty bad medical practice.
Yeah, it's really fucked. But again, it's like people say they sterilized like it was a fucking eugenics program. Again, if they didn't want Ethiopian Jews, they wouldn't have taken the Ethiopian Jews in. So yeah, it's like, I always get these little things where it's like Israel does something bad or something bad happens involving Israel, and people are like, it's always like I guess it's like with anything in the world, is that people just like have to amplify it tenfold, so it becomes like this totally different thing. Yeah.
I think you'd fairly argue that Israel just has bad optics at times. I've dealt with this myself. I sympathize. I get that. That's interesting because I didn't hear the earlier part of that claim that the initial thing had stemmed from a kind of mistranslation and cultural transposition. There's something still to that. I think it reminds me a little bit, I guess, of the hysterectomies that we've done to some of the Latina women who have been kept at the border, like undocumented, where it's like some hysterectomies have been performed, but it wasn't like camp policy to do it or whatever. It was like there were doctors that would occasionally misprescribe it as solutions to like abdominal cramps, and it was definitely being done negligently and racistly, but it wasn't like, Order 66 shit.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
I feel like this was pretty great. I feel more knowledgeable. I want to learn more about the Oslo Accords. The problem, of course, is that like this conflict is historically difficult to read up on. I think I'm gonna have to like power through my ADHD, really make an effort, you know, because I guess I want to know who specifically I'm supposed to be mad at in a historical context. Who should I be mad at in a historical context?
For the Oslo Accords, like Israeli right wingers who tried to fuck it up, Hamas, Arafat, who I don't know what the fuck Arafat was. Arafat was he did a lot of weird shit. There was like a whole dispute about East Jerusalem with the Temple Mount and who gets sovereignty over that area. But part of Arafat's negotiating position was to say that there never was a Jewish temple in the area, which is it's just false. I don't. Yeah, it's like, how do you negotiate with that? And also the way that he would like constantly dither about his position on negotiations, or like there was one peace talk where he refused to condemn a terror attack for some reason, and yeah, he was a bit weird. Netanyahu allowing fucking. Basically redefining Israel's strategic points in the West Bank, especially in the Jordan Valley, so that they could hold on to them for like 20 years after giving the Palestinians their state. So basically, you have this like 10% chunk of the West Bank that was going to be Israeli controlled for security reasons, even though they weren't really security positions that he was claiming. Yeah, there's a lot. It's really
it's a lot to read up on. Yeah.
At the end of the day, the Palestinians did have the moral high ground. They want, like, the majority of them wanted a two-state solution. It's just, I don't know. Their leaders were quite shit. The Israeli leaders were quite shit. A lot of bad things just happened around it. Like, yeah, it's just very unfortunate.
It's engaging with history purely on a spite basis, just trying to learn who I'm supposed to be mad at. I feel it's, you know, there are worse foundations. No, I appreciate it very much. Thank you for all the info and the corrections. I'd love to talk to you again in the future. I feel like I only ever talk to people in the context of like somebody said something or some concern or antagonism, but you know, you know far more about this than I do, so I would defer to your knowledge in the future. You know, as things continue. And obviously we're not done with this, right? Like Netanyahu has made it pretty clear he plans to invade the South too. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Oh God. It's really depressing. I guess that's why I think going into the history is just like a cope way, because it's easier, you know?
It's like, let me like assume some perceived control over the situation. Like now, as I watch it all happen, I get to like, now, 60 years ago, this other thing happened. It's you know what I mean?
Yeah, it does help to show kind of how we got here. And I think even as far as a peace process today, I think at least if you learn about Oslo, I'd imagine like the Clinton parameters that came in 2001 are probably still the most realistic thing that could come. I don't know. I'd ultimately like to see one state where they all share the land and everyone's happy, but one thing at a time.
Yeah. One day.
Yeah.
Well,
I have to ask you one more thing.
Oh, yes.
People want me to ask you about your music takes.
No. I was gonna ask. They're gonna ask me if I condemn Hamas. My music takes are good, and nobody has an issue with them. And I appreciate you coming on.
Okay, that's all good.
Chat's been on my ass lately.
I know I would normally shout myself out, but I'm going to shout out a YouTuber who actually has a really good video on the peace process. His name is Beast Process, one word, peace process with two B's, because Arabs don't have the letter P. You know that?
Oh.
So they say like police.
Do they?
Or beast process.
Like they don't even make the noise? Like that?
I mean, they sometimes do, because I guess they sometimes have to for like the words like Palestine, I guess. Yeah, because they call it Philistine. But yeah. Yeah, it's funny.
I didn't know that.
Anyway,
that's actually pretty cool. You know, like how we don't have. I know there's like a noise or something that we don't have. Whatever the case may be, I really do appreciate you coming on. I will shout out you because you're Loner Box, and I like your streams.
And this guy's called Vaush, by the way, Ian Vaushinsky.
Don't check him out though.
Ian. Fat Ian lives forever in my heart.
Oh no, in spirit always. We will always be on Fat Boy Hours. I hope you have a wonderful day. Speaking of, I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Take care, man. Thank you for coming on.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was nice. Yeah. Go check out Loner Box's streams. He's not, as we are, a hardcore Stalinist, so you're just going to have to contend with that, that great ideological divide while you watch his stuff and learn about other stuff, you know? You should talk to Lonerbox more. He has the best takes on IP. By IP, do you mean international politics, or do you mean like IP law, like intellectual property? Ben Gavir just posted the N-word with the hard R.